Hello, everybody. They let me out of the cellar. I'm in our kitchen on the Garde Pass, and I'm here today to bring you champagne and oysters. Joining me tonight is a dear friend. This is Tom Stocks from Taylor's Shellfish.
Thank you.
He's a director of sales.
Yes, sir.
And that's sort of a new position for you. It's kind of weird saying that because I knew you.
It was an April Fool's joke.
Was it really?
Yeah, for sure.
That was your promotion, huh?
Yeah, that was the moment right there.
Well, you know, like, for what you all have provided for us with Taylor's Shellfish, it was really one of the biggest pieces of having the Crab Shack be successful. And you were instrumental in getting us all that product for crabs. But before that, when I got to know you, you were the director of restaurant operations, were you?
Correct.
Yeah.
I, let's say, started Melrose, built the program, and then conducted the expansion for the whole restaurant program and oversaw that for 8 years.
The restaurant, or with part of Taylor's?
9.5.
9.5 years.
Yeah, 9.5.
And I've met a lot of people in the family, so it's a multi-generational, family-run business, right?
Nah, there was an old man Tom, but he just retired.
Okay.
So I gave him the boot.
You gave him the new old man Tom.
The saying goes, Taylor Shellfish, 5th generation oyster farming family, been working the same land in the Taunton Inlet since 1890. We got there, the forefathers of the family left Wyatt Earp on the Arizona flatlands and came up to Seattle, or the Puget Sound, to start growing oysters instead. And then here we are 130 odd years later.
Wow. Congratulations. We're still catching up. We turned 70 this year.
Wow.
God, look at that, huh? We've got
Just
years
a
on
couple
us.
quarters.
Well, today we're going to talk about some of our favorite things.
Yes,
Both,
2 of them.
Yeah, champagne, a shared love for that, and one that you've specialized in for many years. I don't want to wait too long before we start drinking, but let me tell you what's in the box and how we're going to do this. So part of this format will look like this. You've got 18 oysters, 3 different varieties, you've got 3 half bottles of champagne, and we want you to work with the product as soon as it comes out. You've got cocktail sauce, you've got your mignonette, you've got fresh lemons. You should have your oyster knife out, your toothbrush and your towel, just so we can get started and start to clean some of the oysters off and once we're ready to work with them. You'll see, as far as our mise en place goes, we have oysters that are on ice, our sauces and everything, accoutrements ready to go, and we're missing champagne. Right? I don't like waiting too long before we get started in drinking.
I won't do anything until you open a bottle of champagne.
Okay, well, let's do this. Let me take you to the first bottle of champagne. This is Pierre Gimonet, a Blanc de Blanc, a champagne from France. And we'll talk a little more about that. I want to make sure that we get and set some ground rules in opening bottles of champagne and being really careful and safe with them. So the first will be treating it as a dangerous and live item, right? So as we open the bottle of champagne, you're careful with it. It's all pretty live until you start touching the cage. So we'll take the foil off.
Billy, while you're doing that, does it ever go wrong on the dining room floor? You ever lose a cork on the dining room floor? I mean, how dangerous is it really?
Should
we be scared of it?
You know, I've had bottles where corks shot up to the ceiling.
Yeah.
I've had bottles where I've been in total control of it and shot off in my hand, but because the agitation of the bottle and wasn't set right, just gassed up and shot all over the table and the guests. Yeah.
But someone would lose an eye for sure.
Oh yeah.
You could probably lose an eye opening champagne, but not opening oysters. This is the most dangerous part of the night right here.
No, this is.
Oh, there you go. Said they want to see the label.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do that.
Label.
You know what? I know we got this one here, but there's another bottle of champagne that we have on the side that we want to get started with. And I'll only do this when I'm sober and had nothing to start with. So we're gonna savor a bottle of champagne for you.
Yeah, let's just talk about it because I feel like this is tradition. You taught me how to do this.
Yeah, I always get nervous.
And so for folks at home, because we got a bunch watching, would you recommend they follow along on this part of the show, or maybe we just watch?
I would say, yeah, well,
You
follow
can
along and
savor a bottle
watch.
of champagne with anything.
You can, yes, you can.
Ish.
But I've seen so many things go wrong that I'd only want you to do it. And doing
Maybe
it,
not.
I'm endorsing it. So I only want you to do it under the safest conditions. There are goggles to wear. There are gloves to be had. But if I can pass on some information, the most important piece is that you have something heavy to go through the motion with, like a cleaver or a heavy knife, something that's flat and with a blunt edge to it, and that the champagne bottle be very cold, and two, that you start to clean up around the area when you start looking at a bottle of champagne. And the last thing would be is that you're letting the force of and the motion of the bottle, of the blade, carry you through the bottle in one motion. You're not afraid of it.
May I add something?
Yeah.
If you don't splurge for a nice bottle of good provenance, cooks or what have you, no shame, it will blow up in your hand. It's
Good
got to
point.
be
Yeah.
got to be a nice French or the like bottle with a pure seam that you can run down and follow it and pop it open. Otherwise, you will be on Instagram shortly.
You will be on
For the wrong-
Instagram.
for the
You've
wrong
seen
reason.
that.
For the wrong reasons.
For the wrong
Absolutely.
reasons.
Well,
Yeah.
and then let's go through the anatomy of a bottle just quickly and things that'll help us be successful. So I'll do this with a separate bottle, but I want it to be very, very cold, ice cold, and I don't want to be handling it a whole lot once I'm ready to open the bottle. So what I'll do is I'll strip everything that's on the bottle. It won't be pretty. I'm just going to take everything off that's coming from it. There are 3 parts to a bottle. There are 2 sides that are sealed together, and there's a seam on both ends, right? Once they're put together this way, there's a seam on either end. And at the very top of that is the crown of the bottle. And at that corner spot, at that 3-way piece, is the weakest part of the bottle, and that's where we're going to aim. There's also a cage on this, which makes it much more difficult. But what I want to do is I want to keep everything together. So there's this move that I'm gonna do where I open the cage up, keeping my thumb on the cork, wiggle it up just a little bit.
How many turns opens it?
6.
So yeah, so if you want to keep your hand on top of it, if you turn it 6 times, you know you've officially untwisted.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yep. And expose the seam so it's right here. So that's what I'll do with this bottle, or the next bottle I'm working with. Ice cold. I'm sober and of sound mind. I'm going in an open space where no one is around. You gotta be relatively confident
It's
in
worth
doing
saying
it.
out loud that one of your proteges in the past actually did this in let's just call it a large European chateau, right?
Yeah.
Right. And he was asked to savor a bottle of champagne. This is
Yeah.
a beloved member of the Canlis family, the Philip Dunn.
Yeah.
And he sends the cork across this old cave into a cage full of ancient magnums, right? And they
Yeah.
all just explode like
Yeah.
so many like fireworks or bombs or something. So
Right.
you really do want to watch where this cork goes.
Yeah,
You
we
wanna
want to
send
avoid
it-
that.
So we're gonna send it to Jordan, cameraman number 2, just because he's tough. I feel
Cameraman
like
number
he's got
1. Okay,
goggles
well, we're
on.
coming towards you, Jordan. So here's what I'll do. I'll prep the bottle and prep the cage. And in one motion, after I do a quick sort of like test run, I'm just gonna whack right through it.
Can you do this with an oyster knife?
You could do it with an oyster knife. I would say that I'm the bad uncle who will tell you to do it when you're a little inebriated, when you're in a great mood, to be slightly careful, probably outside, and everything will be fine. But I didn't say that.
But you didn't say that.
I didn't say
Of course
that.
not. No. Nelson knows what he's doing.
This is the professional here.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thanks for all the pressure, guys.
And then he has all the pressure.
Okay, so I'm finding the seam.
Yeah, so
Got it.
for those at home, it's going to be really hard to see on the camera, but every bottle has 2 seams. They're going to be exactly opposite from one another, and you've got to run the blade straight down that seam right to where it hits the lip of the bottle. So
So what are you doing there,
you
Nelson?
can feel it
So-
sometimes with your hand, but like
Here, I've got the seam. I've got it exposed. I've got the cage pulled up over the cork still, but attached to the bottle, just so I can get a clean shot at the glass. I want the cage to carry the cork, or the cork to carry the cage with it. I don't want to be shaking this bottle around too much. And I want something sharp.
Just happen to have this sword right here.
Not so sharp.
Not so
I want
sharp.
something heavy that I can go through it in one motion, right? I'm gonna run up through it, pop it over. I've lost the seam.
Tom, I feel like if you blow in his ear just as he's
Do you think we could open the oyster with that knife?
I think we could, yeah.
Ooh,
Almost. There it is. There it is. All right.
there it is. All right, second try. But if you watch that in slow motion, or that after I hit it the first time, I broke the glass, broke the seam. The cage caught the cork without going out all the way, and on my second hit, it kicked out.
Nelson, is there glass that's going to be in the bottle now after you're doing that?
There's no glass in it, actually, right? Everything shoots out. You saw a little bit of that champagne come out. So actually, it's really good and clean and safe to drink.
Can you drink it right out of the bottle?
You should not drink it right out of the bottle.
I'm here to
You've done this
I'm
before.
here to I'm the people's person here. I'm here to ask the
You
question.
actually want to be sober because
Yeah.
you drink out of the bottle, you will not have lips.
Yeah, you will not.
They'll just be like, no. fine.
All right,
That'll
well,
be
that's that. So that's, if you want to take a look at this bottle, this is our private label champagne that we did with Robert Monqui. It's a blend that Jackson and I did in 2018. It got here late last year. We've finally been selling it. Tom was there on the trip. It was an unbelievable
I was
adventure for us. And it's 100% Chardonnay. And here we go. Yeah. Well, let's taste this first before we get to that.
Do you think we could do this with an oyster knife?
Let's try.
I will say that this doesn't always go great, but undeterred. This is an hand wrought steel from my brother who does this thing on his free time. Nelson is terribly nervous.
No.
It ain't gonna work. The nice thing about an oyster knife is that it bends and it's soft, and it's not gonna pop a bottle of champagne. Did you find it?
I found the original sort of like cork right there.
That's gonna break.
I'll give you that there.
Thank you.
All right, so this is the Monqui. Let's do a quick toast. Cheers, brother. Beautiful. All right. Okay, so we'll go with Pierre Gimonet. This is the first champagne that we're starting with. You should be doing that at home as well. Blanc de Blanc means it's all Chardonnay grapes coming from the Côte de Blanc. So as you look at champagne, what makes it really famous and popular is that it's not very far from Paris. It's an hour and a half away. And you take a train, you take the bullet train, you get to Reims, the center of it all, or then Epernay. And there are tons of really accessible wineries and champagne houses along the way, and beautiful sort of landmarks to see as well. So while people are there, it's got this like great, vibrant, I don't know, like feel to it, right? You're in Champagne, you're in France, and what's easy to love is that you find wine and champagne everywhere you go, along with fresh oysters. So let's start with this. This is Pierre Gimonet, Blanc de Blanc. Our Grand Cru.
What makes this wine especially enticing with oysters? I mean, I guess I should answer that question, but
Yeah.
why did you choose it to have this party?
Well,
with
I
us?
always feel like it's a natural combination, not just because champagnes are that aperitif and something you'll start the meal with, but you have what makes champagne special is you have secondary fermentation happening in the bottle. So you have that natural effervescence to it, which remind me of sort of like that briny, citrusy quality that you'd find in champagnes, and then lifts it with the gas that's there. So that for me means a starter wine or something to begin the meal with, something that continues to open the palate and ready for you for a meal.
I think that a lot of when we talk about champagne and oysters, they have parallel textural components, and we like to start the meal with a linear oyster and a linear champagne, something that kind of drives into your palate and really opens you up a little bit, so that you create some appetite, you begin to salivate, and then what you want is to eat more and drink more. So Blanc de Blanc, razor's edge, along with the oysters, we're going to begin that meal process where we love the salt, the acid, the back and forth, and then everything else we have after that sounds delicious.
All right. Well, let's get opening some oysters.
Okay.
Which one do you want to start with first?
I want to start, based on that thing that I just said, with an oyster called Shigoku. So Taylor Shellfish Farm, every oyster that we grow, born in our hatchery, raised in our nursery, planted and raised on our beaches, 13,000 acres of tide land between Canada down through what we call the Salish Sea out to Willapa Bay. One thing that you could do when you pick up your first oyster, first of all, let's identify this. Shigoku is going to have a deep cup, black and tan stripes, and a very flat lid. And that is a product of how it grows. Before I tell you that, what I want you to find is this little white dot at the back of every oyster. First thing that'll do is identify the hinge. We're going to talk about the clock, which to open an oyster. But that is also the mother shell where our larvae attached and then grew into this oyster here. So every oyster that you go through in your kit will have a little white dot at the back. And that is a sign that they were born of our broodstock and taken all the way through to the beaches and to you.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So Shigoku oyster, grown in 2 beaches. We're talking about Samish Bay and Willapa Bay. Big swaths of tide land with about 10-foot deep depth. Deep depth, got that right. And what we do is we grow these oysters in a mesh bag affixed 3 feet off the tidal floor. Tide comes in, bag rolls up, tide goes down, bag falls down. And that is a natural rock tumbling process that gives us deep cups, flat lids, smooth shells, fat bellies.
Yeah.
So am I going to open this right now?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
How old is that oyster as you look at it?
13 months.
13 months. Okay.
Yeah, they grow extremely fast. When you live at the top of the water column, you eat all the freshest algae. You don't need to kind of wait for the tide to come and go, so they feed constantly.
Yeah.
The opposite of that, or the other side of that, is that they're crowded in these bags with their friends who constantly push and poke them around. So while they eat good, they're always just a little cranky.
Yeah.
They're like Manhattan oysters, you know? We got a few countryside guys after this. So I'll just pop these open. Are we going to explain, or?
Yeah, why don't you pop them open and start going with it? Take us through it. I think people at home, you're going to start with these oysters and then keep going until you get all 6 of them open and start eating them as well.
Fantastic.
So I know that we skipped the early process of cleaning them, but if you're at home and you have the toothbrush, what are they cleaning specifically?
This is the hinge where the 2 oysters come together. You can wash the oyster in your sink, cold water, it's going to be fine. That's going to eliminate a lot of the debris. But what really is going to inhibit you from opening the oyster easily is any debris here in the hinge. So you just want to, we clean these ahead of time, but if you want to give this a little bit of a brush, it's going to clear out any residual debris. The other thing you can do is just take your knife and run it right through.
Okay.
And pop it open.
All right.
So, you know, obviously, an oyster is a product of biodiversity. You'll find that some of the other oysters we have, especially these Samish Bay, have barnacles on the bottom. That is just a sign that where they come from, the living is good. But as long as the barnacle is not tucked up into the hinge there, we're going to be great.
All right, let's pop some oysters.
Okay, here we go. So I'm going to like kind of start and then go, but I want the oyster in my hand. I want the knife in my fingertips. I want to be away from my body, and I just want to kind of, feel it, lollipop. I'm going to turn the car off, wipe it off, and come back, and then scrape.
Okay.
And there we go. So that's about as fast as I can do it, and as obscure, and then we can start breaking it
All
down
right, well, you know
thereafter.
what? Give me an oyster. Let me try this.
Let's do it, you know?
Well, you know, because people are watching at home. This is only my 3rd oyster that I'll be working with. But you taught me a little more in the back. I think everyone at home is watching, a lot of them at home, if they've not done it before, are just like worried about hurting themselves.
So let's start with that. So,
Okay, so you told me to like get a firm base and plant
Yep.
myself.
Tai Chi, bow and arrow, right?
Bow and arrow. Stay loose.
Stay loose. Now,
Okay.
everyone will tell you to wrap it in a towel and shuck on what we call the deck. But what you're going to do is you're going to blow up the oyster.
Okay.
And you're not allowing yourself the relaxation and the freedom of opening it with a little more precision. That's also, while in theory safer, it's not very safe for the oyster.
Okay.
So a towel is great if you want a little protection. What I would recommend for you is to put it in your hand.
Okay.
All right. Like that.
Stay loose,
I'm going
yeah.
to take it out just so you guys can see my hands a little more. But if we put the oyster on the deck and we drive the knife into the oyster, we're going to do just that. We're going to blow it up. So what we want to do is have it out in front of us in our fingertips, and we're going to work the oyster onto the knife. Now this is very difficult for a lot of people to do because they try to go flat into the oyster. But if you
Right.
see the angle of my knife, it's clearly, about 30 to 45.
Yeah, and you said something. You said put the oyster onto the knife. So I'm not throwing the knife up. I am just like pushing down a little.
I am
Pushing
using
the oyster into it.
pulling it down.
Yeah.
If you push the knife into the oyster, when you miss, you will push the knife into your hand.
Got it. So oyster down onto the knife.
And it's a little back and forth.
Okay. So I'm choking up on the blade because
Yep.
that's not sharp. That's not going to hurt me.
Nope. We
And-
want the blade to be dull and not
Okay.
pointy. Because we're
Okay.
not trying to cut anything. Then
Yeah.
we cut the oyster.
All right. So now that I've got it in there,
We call this the lollipop.
we got the lollipop. Okay.
Now, everything is about our left thumb here. So we're going to take our left thumb and we're going to push it down. We're going to take our right hand and we're going to pull back and we're just going to turn the car off. So
Okay.
basically we're just going to turn the car off.
Oh,
You did pretty good there.
missed it.
Are you trying too hard?
I probably am. Yeah.
I think
Okay.
that most people
There you go.
try too hard. Most people squeeze the oyster too tight. Most people tense up way too much.
Oh, got it.
Like
Yep.
Nelson's hand is shaking.
Yeah,
already.
Nelson's hand is
you know,
shaking.
like-
You're supposed to shake.
No, because
Okay.
every
So-
oyster has
Relax the
this
shoulders. I'm
area
really nervous.
that will allow it to be opened.
Okay.
So if you're pushing against the shell and you cannot get it open, then you are just fighting the oyster. It will
Got
allow
it.
you.
Don't fight those.
Don't fight it, okay?
Yeah, you know, I was a little nervous there.
Yeah, you already got it all done.
Okay. But
This
I didn't.
this
is the
isn't a
last bit
speed
of it.
contest.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm
Back to
going
where
up
we
against.
were.
Yeah.
Right here, I've just turned the car off, and the knife is touching the top shell here. I'm going to come up over here and turn it off again,
Okay. You
and
work
then I'm
your
going
way
to
up.
scrape through,
Scrape through. Got it.
just like that. Now, you're probably wondering what I am doing, how I'm holding the oyster. We kind of got a little ahead of ourselves there. So, can we see this?
Yeah.
Every oyster in the world.
Beautiful. They don't even know which one's yours and which one's mine. I can tell you that right now.
Let's go.
In an oyster competition, I would be ahead of you.
He's already talking
But-
smack. He opened one
Yeah.
oyster. He's talking smack.
Yeah.
Hey, can we talk about oysters?
It's too close to call.
He chewed it too.
Isn't it true that you're one of the fastest oyster shuckers in Seattle?
I'm the fastest oyster shucker in this room, for sure.
Well, you've not seen me shuck, but also it's true. I don't want to brag too much, but are you one of the fastest oyster shuckers in America?
Yeah, there was a time where I was, for sure.
There was a time.
And now I have graduated to sensei.
Were you ranked worldwide in oyster speed shucking?
Officially, probably not.
That's where we draw the
The number one in my book. You know what? I go
Yeah,
around
yeah.
town telling all my friends I know Tom. He's now
I think that every oyster
graduated.
shucker in the world knows who I am,
Okay.
and they don't want to step to this.
That's because there was that bad Instagram video.
Yes.
That's what you were talking from the heart earlier.
No.
Okay.
I try to really downplay my international acclaim, but you can let everyone know about it. Okay.
I'll put it in the chat.
So what I want to show here, if you can see this oyster on the above camera here, is that here's the white dot I was talking about. This is at the hinge, okay? This is where the two oyster shells come together. Every oyster, when we open it, is a clock. So the hinge is 6. The bill, as we call it, is 12. And then if you look at these guys right here, what you'll notice is that this muscle the adductor muscle, which is responsible for opening and closing the oyster. It is the only thing holding the shells to the meat. Is on every oyster in the world, 3 o'clock. So when I kind of did that whole opening procedure, what I was really doing is taking my knife from 6, working it to 3, and then scraping the muscle off, which detaches the top shell. A lot of people will look at an oyster and say, where do I start?
Right.
Where am I supposed to go? What we want to do is we want to start. Now, obviously, if there's a little bit of a horn there, we're going to start at 6:15 or 5:45. I kind of like to start at 6:15.
Okay.
But I'm just going to lollipop it, okay? Thumb down, hand back, turn the car off, and now I have opened the oyster. It's ready for me to go. I come back at 4:45, and I'm going to turn the car off again. I'm going to spin my knife back because what I want to do is create space for me to work.
Right.
And then I'm working towards 3 o'clock. My knife is dull. It's not going to cut anything. It's not sharp. What it's going to do is scrape the muscle off the shell. So I'm going to come up here at 3 o'clock.
That's it. Yeah.
Drive my knife against the shell and take the top right off. Now, with every great oyster with a little bit of growth, there's going to be a little bit of shell at the top. So we just take our right thumb, Zamboni. There you go. Now we have the oyster off the top shell. I want to keep my hands exactly in this orientation and then turn them. And I'm going to take the oyster knife at 12, as we discussed, and scrape it up and detach it. So that is kind of like the clock technique.
All right.
Yeah. And then we have this Shigoku, oceanic brine, big vegetal flavors.
Beautiful oyster.
Goes right through this wine.
Well, let's see. Since you're an oyster judge and you go around and you're judging all these tournaments around the world, what's your version of the perfect condiment on an oyster? We've got cocktail sauce, we've got mignonette, we've got lemon here, and that's because we're trying to provide everyone, as much as we can what they feel comfortable with, because that's something that's just something you enjoy at home. But what do you want?
Well, oysters, presented through like a fine dining or restaurant sense seem very intimidating to people, but really what they are is they are a family food. They are one of our oldest foods, and what you should do is you should enjoy them thoroughly. Whether you put lemon or hot sauce or mignonette or what have you, all of these different condiments, they are for you to enjoy. So I really push back at the kind of what's right, what's wrong. Mm-hmm. But we're a couple, good-looking experts sitting here in a kitchen talking about oysters, and I find that the finest condiment for an oyster is a fine glass of wine. Now that's kind of corny and all that, but what we're really talking about is this wine has elevated acidity, it has clean flavor, it has a mousse, that is reminiscent of the top of the sea foam. It is everything that an oyster is and isn't. This is briny and crunchy and straightforward. They're both going to go pierce right through you, and they're delightful. The wine takes you up, the oyster brings you down, you put them together, and you have this wonderful keyed out sensation of combination. So if you want a little spice of cocktail sauce, you got to have it. If you want the refinement of some mignonette, absolutely. If you're sitting around with some lemon, that's going to be great. But if you want to really just find the way the oyster's flavor goes up and down and balance it, then you're going to have some champagne.
Yeah. You spent some time in restaurants behind the bar doing this as a combination. I love your philosophy here. It's a food and wine pairing about just sort of like enhancing the experience of what you have. So champagne on its own, terrific and awesome, something I would drink all day. Have it with some oysters, life's even better.
Yes.
And you look at having a meal and you're sitting down before or at lunch and you're having some oysters, champagne makes the meal better. That in itself, I think, is
well,
something
this oyster
worthwhile.
is salty. It's going to make you thirsty. And this wine is going to quench your thirst.
Cool.
So, Tom, can we just acknowledge the fact that you said mousse reminiscent of sea foam?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And those 5 words or so, I just want to pause on those.
Yeah.
So Nelly, when he talks about mousse, are we talking about mouthfeel? We're talking about
We're
bubbles
talking
in
about
champagne?
the froth, right?
The
The
froth.
light froth.
Okay.
Here, when we look at quality of champagne that goes into the glass, even talking about just the vessel that we're drinking it in. Instead of a cylinder or a small thin flute, I like, and we do, and talking about this earlier in the discussion, we like glassware, we like a white wine glass, or maybe something even a little bigger as far as the bowl goes. Give the champagne a space to breathe and open up. We want it to be cold, and that's the temperature that both champagne and oysters need to be cold. They need to be chilled, they need to be refreshing, but as it opens up and comes to room temperature, you'll see it change so dramatically. You want that to change for the champagne, not the oysters for that matter, but that gives us a champagne where we get a chance to smell it even more. The wine opens a lot more in the glass when you get a chance to smell it, swirl it. You put it on the palate, and immediately, not only do you get acid, but you get this beautiful froth and this mousse that sort of like just starts to fizzle up, just like the moment you put it into a glass. That's what you get on your palate. It's not aggressive. Sometimes cheaper champagnes will have that big pop of carbonation. This is champagne. This is a froth and a mousse reminiscent of sea foam.
Sometimes when I drink champagne, I think about lattes and cappuccinos and macchiatos, and I think about the bubbles of the milk. And this, it has like that fine, those fine bubbles.
It's beautiful. So Pierre Gimonet, back to it, is one of the smaller producers, and you'll start to see in the lineup. And what we're trying to do is go beyond what you would normally see in a grocery store. But this is available at some of the finer retailers. But this is what's called an RM, so récoltant manipulant. So smaller producers, growers, working through their estate to make champagne from vineyards that they own. Maybe a few vineyards that they own, or they're purchasing fruit. But in this case, it's an RM, a récoltant manipulant. Small producer, like we do with farmers, somebody that we know, somebody we trust, vineyards that we know, very specific to what they're having here. And it's all Chardonnay. It's a beautiful bottling of it.
Would
Cool.
Taylor Shellfish be a récoltant manipulant?
I would say yes. I mean, you're family owned, right? You're growing your own fruit or product.
Yes.
And then you're selling it
selling yourself.
themselves.
Yeah,
So the biggest part, a lot of it's the élevage. It's like how you handle and how you store, how you sort of, like we say, élevage, and how you care for the product through its life. So in that first oyster, was it 14 months? That's the élevage of a champagne spending, but
Yeah, we try to get it, once it comes off the beach, we're delivering that oyster and, as quick as possible. So that moment, once it is harvested, then there's not as much élevage per se, but ours really comes from the moment that oyster is born and then how we raise it on the beach or pick the location, choose the age, the season. At the restaurants, what we always talked about was that an oyster was the species, the beach, the technique, and the season.
right.
A lot of parallels to wine there with varietal and vineyard and winemaker and what
And
have
vintage,
you.
yeah,
and
all
vintage,
together.
right?
Yeah,
So I think there's a lot of parallels.
right.
And I think I want to open that bottle of wine there.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Well,
while
let's-
you're opening that bottle of wine, quick question about so we included a toothbrush. If you get a particularly, furry oyster, is there a move there? Can you just go over like the brushing of?
How
the
would you
oyster?
define fur? Like a lot of stuff on the shell?
I'm not sure I know how to define fur, but maybe I'm just saying if I had an oyster and I had a toothbrush, what would I do with them?
What you want to do, most importantly, is you want to take, so every oyster is 2 shells, top and bottom. The only time when debris is going to get into the oyster is on that equator right there. So you want to, if you're going to clean the oyster and be very kind of meticulous with it, number one, you want to clean the hinge and get all the debris out of there. Because when you're opening the oyster, anything that your knife grabs on the way in will then land on the belly. Nothing on the top, nothing on the bottom is really going to make its way onto the meat, unless you're like very creative shucker. So you want to work on cleaning the hinge and then working your way around the edge of the oyster where the 2 shells come together.
Beautiful.
And that is going to kind of eliminate the peripheral damage, collateral damage of opening an oyster.
Yeah.
You're always going to want to clean it at the end because oysters grow. New growth is fragile. When you open it, the new growth will kind of lie there. But if you take the fat of your thumb and Zamboni it out, you're going to be able to clean that oyster off.
Right on.
Yeah. And
All
you
right.
can take the toothbrush and
Zamboni it.
clean it up. Yeah.
Do my thing. Well, let's keep moving along with what we have for champagne. On to the next one. This is Philippe Fontaine, and this is a Blanc de Noir. So we're going with one called a Blanc de Blanc, where it's all Chardonnay, into a Blanc de Noir, which means white from red. So what we're doing here then is getting white juice from red grapes. So just talking about this champagne production altogether, there are 7 grape varieties that are allowed into it, but the 3 most important ones are Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. So Chardonnay and the Pierre Gimonnais, now we're going into Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. So this is a blend here, and I want to go back to what it takes to open a bottle properly and see if I can do this right. As I'm doing it on the dining room floor, I'm always being very careful. I'm working in a small space, and I'm working with a very expensive bottle of champagne. I want to make sure that I keep and capture all the gas that's in here, so I can provide a guest a clean sort of like just bottle to work with. I've removed the foil, and now I'm holding it at an angle here where I can put my thumb onto the top of the bottle and work through the cage. So this here, I'm pulling the cage back and twisting it 6 times, 5, 6, and opening up just a little more. So I don't want anything catching with what I'm doing. I've got a firm grip on the cork, and I never want to take my hand off of the cork. Now it's a live bottle. If I take this off and wave it around, that's a dangerous bottle to be working with. If it's upright, still more of the same. All the gas is trying to release, so I want to have full control over it. Next thing I'll do is I'll put pressure on the cork with my thumb and pinch the top of the cork with my index finger and my thumb. And what I'll do is I'll hold that firm and I'll twist the bottle. See that?
It's kind of like bringing the oyster onto the knife.
Yeah. It's subtle, it's gentle. The moment I started to do that first turn, I could feel the cork starting to come out. Now I've used my middle finger to get a better grip of the bottle while I hold on to the cork. And all I'm doing is nudging the bottle out. As I'm getting towards the top of the cork, I hold it there, and the next move is probably the most important one, is I'm pushing the cork away from me, letting it come out slowly and controlling it, but pushing it away from me. So I can have a release of the cork and the gas come out, not all at once, but create a small seam where you can hear it hiss. So instead of it popping out this way, I pull it back to let it out. That, for me, with that small hiss, is the perfect opening. I look at it and make sure that I keep it at a 45-degree angle or at an angle here where more of the trapped gas is being released so it doesn't shoot out. Then I can put it upright safely.
So you don't want to hear the pop.
You don't want to hear the pop.
Yeah,
you want
okay.
that soft hiss.
Unless you're celebrating something. But on the dining room floor, we kind of try to.
The only reason to make it pop is if you're going to savor it.
If you're going to save, you're going to go big.
Yeah.
Or like we like to shoot them over the backyard, like and see if we can get them over the fence. That's just our family. But yeah.
But what's good for the ears is bad for the palate, right?
Tom. That's
Right?
true. That's true.
Yeah.
That's really true.
Sage.
You know, when I think about this,
Got them all, man.
even when we're traveling, we're stuck in a room in Paris, one of my favorite places. I wake up in a room, we're like closer than this in 2 small beds.
We were not following COVID protocol with 2 twin beds next to each other.
I can just hear you saying all these romantic things to me.
Yeah, like a couple of questions. People want to know, like, is it overthinking it to pair a specific champagne with a specific oyster? Are you guys, when you guys, I mean, you're tasting these. We're gonna get some oysters open here in a little bit, but like,
Yes. No.
Is
Well,
that-
is
is
it
that going
overthinking?
too far,
No.
or
No.
that's
No.
not overthinking?
You know
Okay.
what? Like, put the thought into it. I would say, and we talked about it. We had a good discussion about it, about what we should start with and what goes next. So, what's the next oyster here, Tom?
So the next oyster is a Kumamoto, but just to touch on that real quick. When I wrote the wine list, what I really wanted to do was to give everyone no bad options. So to always have a wine on the list that was going to, work with their enjoyment. We have a very tight window of products that we work with compared to, a restaurant like Canlis. So we're very specific in our nature, a small number of things done hopefully exceptionally well. I feel that conviviality, enthusiasm, and show labels run. Conviviality, enthusiasm, and all of that, that is more important than pairing this and that. I think we've all been to a dinner where someone wanted to over-explain every course and you just didn't care. What you want to do is be excited about what you're going to open and what you're going to open from an oyster standpoint, and then just enjoy them.
Right.
I find that just diving into it and being a little less thoughtful sounds bad, but really you want to sit here and open oysters and enjoy them. You want to open champagne and pour it because it is a product for celebration.
Right.
Oysters are for celebration. If you say, oh, I picked out these oysters I love so much and this champagne and I can't wait to share it with my friends and family, you're right on track. But if you're sitting at the wine shop or the oyster shop and you're worried or stressed about what you're going to choose, you've missed.
Taking it too far.
You're taking it too far. So live it,
Right.
Enjoy it.
I went with a different approach. You're saying those things to me that I firmly believe in because that's what I want to do at home or at a party. But here in a restaurant, we want to narrow that down just a little bit. We want to be the ones to say, let's go there, let's take it there, let's kind of geek out a little bit. So I think that's what we did back there. It only took a minute or so to say, well, what do we have? We've got 3 oysters.
Yep.
What do we have? We've got 3 champagnes. What do you think works well? Well, we said, what's, as far as the progression goes, I want a Blanc de Blanc first, I want a Blanc de Noir next, and I want something with a little bit of, not age, but I know that something's gonna be a little fuller bodied and maybe a little earthier, to go third. And then we go back and say, cool, now that we've set what I'm gonna show as far as what we're drinking, now what's next and what are we tasting with oysters? So that's as far as the conversation went. And even further saying well, you know what works is that this oyster is just a little meatier. I want that to go, the Pacifics, I want that to go with an entree or the third course.
I would say that more than individual flavors, texture in both wine and oysters is the one thing that will really either interrupt a pairing or make it work out. And so when we had this Blanc de Blanc with this Shigoku, which is a salty oyster and an acid-driven wine, now we're going to move on to a Kumamoto with a Blanc de Noir.
Yeah.
We're going to have a champagne with fall flavors, big, broad, kind of juicy apples and such. And we're going to pair it with an oyster that itself is very wide on the palate and giving.
Yeah.
Okay? And it still is clean, but it gives you a lot in the beginning. So texturally, I feel like we were right on track with number 1, and then number 2, and then obviously when you're ready, we'll show number 3. So this is a Kumamoto oyster. Kumamotos have the best name in the business, but quite frankly, there's a lot of imitators. Kumamoto is a bay in southern Japan on the island of Kyushu. This oyster was derided by farmers because it never reached the large size that people desired back when we were doing all canned meats. Then one day they realized that it was actually the best half-shell oyster you could have. And it went from being trash to being
Prized.
a prize.
Yeah. Cool.
We brought Kumamoto seed over, us and everyone else in the industry, in the 30s. It didn't take hold. They crossbred it, and the oyster was essentially deemed unimportant, a non-factor. Then in the 80s, what everyone realized is that there were no pure Kumamotos left in the world. And we found about 48 oysters on an abandoned beach in one of our properties that were proven to be genetically pure Kumamoto oysters from Kyushu Bay. So every oyster that Taylor Shellfish sells, Kumamoto, is an heirloom variety, purebred Kumamoto. No one on the market is able to grow this oyster except for us. We've retained this seed to the point where every year we send a batch of Kumamoto seeds to Kyushu Bay to replenish their base because they lost the heirloom variety genetics. This is a fancy tomato. This is an old breed animal. This is an Iberico.
That's cool.
This is an OG.
Is this your favorite? Is this? I mean, do you have a favorite oyster? Is this like? Are we there?
This would be number 2.
Number 2. Okay.
And number 1 isn't available right now.
All right.
And so that's just, all the more reason to pick up class number 2. The nice thing about Kumamotos is that they are a dream to shuck. They are the inspiration for Shigokus. You can see we have done great lengths to create a deep cup and a flat shell for this oyster. And this guy, and it's a guy because it's young, if it got bigger it would be a lady, is naturally occurring, firm flat top, deep cup, big belly, tight flutes, exceptional quality. And what you're going to find is that if you use the techniques we've been briefly discussing here, it's going to pop open. Almost like when you're kind of squeezing a peanut and then it just all of a sudden, it pops open.
So a couple of people asking questions again. So if you go over like we have one lady who's in particular still working on her first oyster. So take us from scratch.
Give me an oyster. Let me show them how it's done. This is all my second oyster.
Go through the fundamentals because a lot of people.
Does she have a specific question?
I'd have to go back in the chat. I'll find out. No, she's just, we've got a lot of.
So we're gonna go.
I'm here for you.
Yeah, we're.
Whatever camera, my dear, you are at. What you need to know is that if you're trying hard, you're probably trying too hard. You need to let the knife find its way into the oyster. And so we're just going to wiggle it on. This, for someone who's new to opening oysters, this feeling right here is alien until you do it once. And then you will know how it feels. It's not a strength. It's not a matter of strength. It's a matter of precision and honestly clearing your mind and not being so embarrassed that you're not getting into the oyster. Just honestly close your eyes, put your mind to the tip of your knife, and wiggle it on till it's right here. Can't take it off. Now we have a lollipop. Again, remember that angle. Most people will try to go flat in. That's not going to work. Thumb down, left thumb down, right hand back, turn the car off. See how easy that popped open?
So you're pushing you're opening up your left hand just a little more. You're pushing down.
I would say my left thumb is the most important finger that I use when I open an oyster.
So interesting.
And I never want to use leverage like a seesaw to open an oyster.
Maybe that was my problem.
I always use torque to use the width of the blade to provide the strength.
Yeah. Okay.
This knife, I've done this before, but I could snap this knife in half right now. Because if you're trying to seesaw open an oyster, you're going to mess up the oyster every time, or your hand, or the knife. It is all about relaxing, entering the oyster, and using torque to go through.
Okay, cool.
Now, once I've gone through here and I've used this torque to open it up, I can feel the muscle right there at 3 o'clock. So I'm just going to keep the tip of my knife touching shell. If your knife is touching shell, it's not touching meat. So I just want to scrape it right through.
There it is, yeah.
And there it is. Zamboni it up, and then I scrape it. I'm going to do it again, okay? So again, I'm going to let the knife, the oyster, come down on the knife, okay? I'm going to turn the car off. I'm going to hear that beautiful snap. I'm going to spin it, and then I'm just going to take it right off. Sorry, that one was too fast.
You know, if you're at Pioneer Square and at Melrose, it's a Seahawks game.
Yeah.
And you've got a line out the door. How many oysters are you doing in an afternoon, you'd say?
I think that if you're doing 30 to 35 dozen an hour, you're keeping pace.
Okay.
Cool. I think that,
Nelson, how many are you doing in an hour?
2. I did 2.
Yeah, so far we've been live streaming for almost an hour, and you've done
But
2.
that's usually my pace.
You can do 35 dozen in an hour.
35 dozen.
I did at your crab check. But when people talk about shucking competitions are 12 or 18 oysters. Well, as we say, no one ever paid the rent on 12 oysters. When you're shucking oysters professionally and you're going, your first dozen, your first 5 dozen are kind of slow. And then when you get into the rhythm and the tickets are piling up and the oysters are, all there on ice, you hit this moment of, I don't know, you just kind of check out. And then the oysters are flying out of your hands.
Right. That's a zen moment.
It's a zen moment. And, if you're going to, a dozen a minute is the idealized goal.
Got it.
Doesn't happen for an hour straight. But if you can get 35 down, 35 in an hour, if you can do a couple hundred in an 8-hour shift, you are good.
That's a pro.
If you can do 25, you're amazing.
Okay.
So, I don't know.
All right. Well, let's save some. We'll go on to the third one. We'll go on to the third wine, and then we'll go on to the last oyster here. The last thing I want to say about what these two champagnes are, or even including what we did with the Moncuy, and these are smaller grower producers, right? RMs, récoltant manipulant. Smaller producers that are more focused on what they have. Like Tom said, a farm that's in control of the product that they have from beginning to end, producing a product where it's aged in their cellars and then they sell it. These are from small, very specialized places around Champagne. One, the Côte de Blanc for the Chardonnay, and then the second one here, the Blanc de Noir, that's from an area called the Aube. And this is a blend of Pinot Meunier and Pinot Noir. 70% Pinot Noir, 30% Pinot Meunier. And these are grown on what looks like this. An old fossilized oyster bed. This is sort of like a representation of what Kimmeridgian soil looks like. You've got oyster shells, you've got seashells, you've got sand, you've got layers of chalk and limestone, and that's reminiscent of Chablis and maybe other basins going even to the Jura. But what's happening here is that you've got red grapes growing on this, and what I get from it in the very end is a product that tastes like salt, like seawater, something that's briny.
Saline.
That salinity that I get from it as well. And if there's one big fruit component, you nailed it. I thought I got a lot of red apple and that strawberry on it. Even though this is a clear wine, it's coming from red grapes, and I feel that coming from it. Okay, we'll go.
How do you get a clear wine from red grapes?
Every time you squeeze a grape, red, white, the juice from that is always clear. The only time you'll get color onto wine is from contact with its skin. So white grapes or Pinot Gris, others that have a little bit more pigmentation, can give you that added color, whether it's something that's bronze or gray or even a little bit more of that rosé-like color. Or then with red wines where you get clear juice, add the skins back to that to start to ferment, and that's what you do. You punch down the cap from red grapes that have been squeezed to clear juice, and then introduce back to the grape skins to get saturation. Okay.
All right.
So we'll move now from two smaller producers into a more recognizable name. This is one of my favorite houses. This is Louis Roederer. This is Roederer Brut Premier, and what I really appreciate about what they've done over the years, and I think what separated them from who their competition is on that top tier, when you start to think about wines or champagnes that you see that are both expensive, as they're sort of like tête de Gouvet, something that's vintage, something that's, $300 or more on a shelf or even on a wine list, to something that's approachable as a non-vintage blend, and then all these different celebration tiers in between, where they're doing a special label, maybe a vintage, but a cross between a small little blend or something more specific as a vineyard. This is a really consistent house, right? So these bigger champagne houses are very competitive. They have money, they have space to sell our wines, then instead of having their own vineyards, they'll buy juice. But for what Roederer will do is that most of their vineyards and things that they own are done biodynamically and organically. That sets them apart from all the others.
What's biodynamic?
Biodynamic means really they're going based off of certain rhythms of nature. So they're planting at a certain time, they are harvesting at a certain time, they're going by the rhythm of cycles within sort of like the natural movement of the earth. And then I would say they're just being sustainable and organic to begin with. Maybe if those principles are followed, I think that's the start of what biodynamic looks like.
I know that when I was selecting wines for our list for all these years, I gravitated always to biodynamic wines, primarily because every kind of treatment that they did to the vine and the grape and everything was in accordance with the cycles of the moon. And as an oyster farmer, we don't do anything unless the moon tells us to, because we work at low tide and we plan at high tide. And every little biorhythm of the oyster is in accordance to the moon. So for me, like biodynamic wines, one, they just had this life to them that I could not put my finger on. And two, it was just such a natural pairing in that we had two products that were completely produced with that old-fashioned wisdom.
Yeah.
Looking at the moon, knowing where the water was moving. You know, I think with biodynamics, they judge the moon to know whether the water is down by the roots or up by the stems.
Yeah.
And the same thing for us. We pick these oysters when the tide is low and they know that they're not going to feed, so they clamp up. And that's when you want to take them out, because they're not going to be trying to feed. If an oyster's trying to feed, when you harvest it, it's going to be a gape, it's going to chip, it's going to not be able to ship. So I just always found biodynamic wines and the whole concept of biodynamics to be fascinating in light of oyster farming.
Right.
Because you got to go out at night and look at the moon, and that's going to tell you exactly what kind of work you're going to do.
You sound like such a hippie. And
That's
what it feels like
or
too.
Or a pagan.
Like when you get those two things combined, you sound like if winemakers were then like oyster farmers. Really, they're doing the same thing. They're taking a product. They're going based off of certain rhythms, whether it's the moon, whether it's the tide. They're more intuitive to what's happening on around them in their environment, whether it's the quality of the water, something that then they would care for and protect, and then maybe more careful about what they put into it and then what they take from it.
You want a farmer who's in tune with the land or in tune with the sea. I mean, that is exactly like what you're looking for in someone who grows food. It's literally what makes the best the best.
Right. All of these things are so new to me to hear you talk about it, but so natural in a sense of when something I would gravitate towards when I hear it in wine, because obviously that means they're caring for it a little more, that maybe the scale of production is small enough where they can pay attention. And that is remarkable.
Whether I'm growing this oyster or I'm opening it,
yeah,
I can sit and try to control it and nothing will happen. Like I can try to jam my knife into it as hard as I can and make it a matter of strength and will. It will not produce a great oyster.
Okay.
We put an oyster on a beach. You can't put food into the water. Where does it go? Everywhere.
Yeah.
You can't control what interacts with that oyster because they're coming from all places, from birds in the sky to crabs on the ground to all different kinds of fish and invertebrates. You can't control it. And I feel that's very similar to vines or grapes in the vineyard. So what I've always looked for from wine producers and what I really enjoy about our profession at Taylor Shellfish is that we know what we can control.
Yeah.
And what we can control is when we interact with our product and how we move it around. We can't really tell it what to do. We can't control how it's going to grow, but we can pick it at the perfect moment with respect to its growing cycle, with the moon, with all of the tides, and then get it to you exactly in that state.
Right.
And I think that that's what biodynamic winemakers really have captured as well, is that they want to know where the moon is, whether they're going to pick or crush or bottle or chill. I mean, there's so many times in our business where we want to go harvest oysters and we know that's not going to happen.
Tom, a couple of people asking questions like specifically about harvesting and timing and such.
Yeah.
So it's like
you
the
keep
tradition
I'm going to open up.
like
What's the third
months that end in R, right? Like is that an old wives' tale? Is that for warmer waters than ours? Can you talk a little bit about like when
so there's a couple
harvest?
different facets to that, and it's fascinating. So the months that end in R was a parliamentary British parliamentary statement that was actually one of the first environmental protection legislatures in the modern world. What they did in the rivers, River Tame and all that around London, they found that everyone was eating oysters like peanuts 12 months a year, and the stocks were depleting. They also lived in a pre-refrigeration time in the world. So there were definitely food illnesses associated with those times. The months that end in R are cold. And then May comes around, and then by the time you get to September, you do feel a little more comfortable. We now live in the 21st century, and there is a multitude of ways that this is both still true and not important at all. Number one, we have refrigeration. So the oysters are going to be temperature controlled 12 months around. And so this idea that when it's hot out, you can't get a safe oyster to the market does not matter. Okay. Two, oysters spawn in the summer. They reproduce. So what the farmers figured out was that they were eating and selling their oysters when they were creating new oysters. It would be like grilling a lot of steaks right before they create a few calves, to put it nicely. So they asked Parliament to protect them from consumption during that period of time. Fast forward, 150 years, we have all these great advancements. Number one, we can monitor every single iota of bacteria in the water to the point where every oyster is safe 12 months of the year. Two, we have great refrigeration, all that stuff. And then three, we now can produce our oysters in a nursery, in a hatchery, and then plant them on broodstock so that we don't have to rely on natural set.
In terms of freshness, because a lot of questions in the chat just around freshness, like how do you know that an oyster is fresh? How do you know that an oyster is quality? Are they looking for something in a grocery store? Do you feel safer buying them? And
well, I mean, I would obviously recommend buying them at one of our markets.
Obviously.
Right.
If for some reason you couldn't get to a Taylor's Shellfish market.
The first thing you would do is go like this.
And tap it.
You want to tap it. If that oyster sounds hollow, sadly I already kind of, weeded out any light ones here, but you want the oyster to be firm and dense and lively. The idea that they are super fresh, 6 hours out of the water is great, but it's not applicable at all times. The nice thing is that oysters spend half of their life out of water every single day, so they're actually incredibly resilient creatures. If they are tight and firm and active when you get them, they're a good oyster. Okay. Now, there's obviously varying degrees of fresh and all that stuff. I kind of like them 2 days out of the water more than anything.
Interesting.
Yeah, when you grab them, they take that last gulp, and that's actually not digested seawater. That's just seawater. We go dip our head in the bay and taste that. When an oyster metabolizes the water, that's when you get the true expose of taking the natural world and the animal and then producing that third concept, which is an oyster that is
seawater and oyster liquor.
Exactly.
Metabolized.
It needs to metabolize it to produce that bouquet that is truly transcendent as far as, one step further. We could go like, hold your head in the bay and not let you get up, and you'd taste a lot of seawater. That's not the same as having oyster liquor, because oyster liquor needs to be metabolized by this amazing animal that takes what we call a sense of accumulation of place. It takes its whole life and filters it down into one little body. And that is what is like a concentrated oyster experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I know we got like a few more minutes. Can we do like a rapid fire couple of questions here?
Yeah, rattle them off.
We just have to say the word out loud. Pearls. What's up? Like pearls. Just
real pearls are from an animal that is somewhere between an oyster and a scallop, and it's not actually something you're going to have. Now, countless times with certain oysters, especially from Canada, due to the growing process, we find false pearls, which are calcium carbonate shell that is balled up into a sphere. I can't think of anything that I fear more than a customer finding a pearl, because it's actually just a jawbreaker. It's just a little worthless piece of shell that will break your tooth. So you won't find pearls in any of these oysters, because that oyster is actually inedible.
Okay, this one's super easy. Thanks for that. This one's super easy. It seems like people have different thoughts about the warming of the earth. It could just sum that up. No, really, no. But ocean acidification, warmer oceans in general, talk about environmental concerns, kind of as you guys see it from Taylor. Like, what are you seeing in the oyster world?
Well, especially about 5 or 8 years ago, we were really hot on oyster acidification, and there are people far more qualified to speak on this subject than myself. What I would tell you from a farmer's standpoint is that we will not stop the acidification of the ocean, which is we believe to be a byproduct of greenhouse gases. What we will do as oyster farmers is continually try to breed oysters based on the water quality to thrive. And so I can't get people to stop driving cars or all of these things, but what we can do is grow the most resilient, healthy oysters. And because we care for our brood stock that becomes the next generation every single year, we can find a way as farmers to persevere through this problem and then let the entire earth deal with greenhouse gases.
It's also worth noting that an oyster kind of makes the water cleaner. Is that true?
Yeah, an oyster will
filtering.
pump 28 gallons of water an hour and literally filter out everything. You could look at that in Hood Canal where there was a lot of runoff of fertilizer, which then created this great big algae bloom, which then robbed out oxygen of the lower levels of the Hood Canal.
Yeah.
So anytime an oyster is going through and chewing up all that algae, what they're doing is taking the oversaturation of a certain small animal and balancing everything out. I've been a part of the Billion Oyster Project in, what is that, New York City, whatever that bay is, I can't remember now, where they're basically trying to put more oysters into the harbor to clean up the pollution, not for consumption, but if they can get 1 billion oysters into the harbor, it will then clear up the oysters.
A couple of folks just finding some extra friends on the outside of the shells, or like if you see like a little, that's just pretty standard just because it's marine life with a zillion little creatures in there.
Should
if you be scared?
No.
Yeah.
If you find a little invertebrate near the shell, that is just a product of biodiversity.
Yeah.
And you can just cast it aside. On the East Coast, luckily we don't have this problem over here, but on the East Coast they have crabs that live inside the oyster's meat, so that when you get them they crunch.
Oh, interesting.
But
a bonus.
Yeah, but we honestly, the Puget Sound is the most nutrient-rich area for oyster farming in the world, and there are some associated friends that come along with that. It's best just to rinse them off and put them in the shell bowl, and what that means is that you have one of the fattest oysters harvested in the world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just want to let you know that Jeanette did finally get her oyster open. There's a lot of celebrating.
Oh, good,
It's a
good.
success. So.
Thank you.
Well,
Jeanette.
the last oyster here that we haven't had a chance to talk about just yet. But Tom, why don't you take us through that really quickly? And
So this is the oyster with all the friends on it.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we put that batch right in the middle, and while we talk, you're gonna open. We're gonna race, and we are going to open as many of them as we can. We'll put the pile.
So are we
right
going to do
here.
this proper?
This proper
Yeah,
race. Yeah.
it's competition style.
So here's
I
what we
mean,
got to do.
Like you don't even know, you can't even tell which one is mine and yours, but they will by the end of all this.
Okay. So
Okay?
you want to know kind of competition rules?
Yeah.
Okay. You got to put your oysters down on the table. Usually you put them face down. Okay. Because when you grab them, you flip them over, you
Okay.
go, right? So why don't you put like 2 or 3 there, and then I'll just work out of the ice.
Just, you know what? Don't insult me like that. I'm gonna do 6.
Okay.
And then if you feel like, oh, let's start even. And if you feel like you're done and you want to come over, then let's just come right over.
Now if I fit, well, you have 8 there.
Let's keep going, bro.
Okay, but I kind of think
got you.
that if I beat you on my turf, then I'm just gonna come over and pour myself another glass of wine.
And then wait for me to catch up?
And then wait for you to
Okay,
catch up.
Got it.
But if you also want, I'll just start grabbing from you.
Just grab from me.
Okay.
Probably be plenty over here.
So when you do shuck competitively, what you do is you put your oysters down. You always stand 6 feet apart, even
The oysters, huh?
yeah, because you want to keep them cold, right? The body heat. And we have our hands in the air.
Mark, you call it. You let us know.
very
And you have to take questions.
While I do it,
Mark, while we're doing this competition.
can I
Ask some
have my eyes open or closed?
You can either one.
You know what?
I
I've
know
got
you like
one
to
eye
close
open.
your eyes.
Just
Are
call
you
it
ready?
that.
Here it comes. On your mark cases. That's Ronnie's. Bah, go. All
Start rapid fire questions.
So, first question that we have for you, Tom. If you were eating an oyster outside of Puget Sound, where would you get it from?
I would either get it from Prince Edward Island, the Atlantic coast of France, or the inside of Vancouver Island.
If I'm breaking off pieces of the shell, what's the most common mistake I'm making?
It's happening with me.
You might not be making a mistake because oysters grow shell, and then it will come off when you open it. If it's in the front of the oyster, that's just natural growth. If you were like digging open the back of the shell, then what you're doing is trying too hard.
Trying too hard.
Yep.
If any other ways around, a lot of questions around freshness and just knowing if it's a good or a bad oyster, eating a bad oyster, anything else to look out for?
First of all, an oyster, you never want to have it when it has passed. So an oyster will only hold its shell closed. It will never hold its shell open. That is a product of relaxing. So if an oyster's shell is open, it is dying. Or it's feeding actively.
East Coast versus West Coast. Give me one East Coast oyster you represent.
Beausoleil from Prince Edward Island I really love. That's our friend Amandi over there. I find that anything south of New York City, I'm not really interested in.
When you're in a competition, it's based on speed and also quality. Is that right?
Yeah. So with every imperfection on the oyster that I put there, I will be docked seconds. So if you cut the belly, do you have any more oysters?
Got two more over here, but don't touch them.
If you cut the belly, or you ding the mantle, or you don't sever it from the bottom, or there's shell, those will be little penalties that will then add up to your raw time. So plenty of people plow through the oysters, mama bird them as we say, chew them for the customers, and then they get docked and they don't make it to the next round.
Mama bird them.
Yeah, don't mama bird oysters. You can't chew them for everybody.
A t-shirt that says
that. No dog oysters, like you left them in the bowl, So.
Hey, well,
do you want me to get some more out of the walk-in?
What happens when this happens? Look at that. The shell just collapsed. Is that a bad oyster?
You find a new job, man. You find a new job.
I did everything you told me.
So I beg to differ. When you do, next time don't bite it open with your mouth, okay?
Dude, I tried.
Were you chewing on that one, Nelson?
You took Mama Bird to a whole new level.
Mama Bird is the oyster. I just totally crushed it.
Sometimes what I will find is that when I'm opening an oyster, sometimes the top shell will crack in half. And then that takes a certain level of skill to work through and pop it.
Yeah.
If the bottom shell cracks on you, it's either from an early predator weakening the oyster when it was young, and then it grows kind of a fissure in the shell, or it's from a shucker, a late stage predator just murdering that oyster and maybe not treating it with a lot of care. So if your knife is trying to scrape the shell and stay off the meat and you're not trying too hard, you will find the path of least resistance and open the oyster. Yeah. If you are trying hard, you're trying too hard.
Yeah.
You gotta just let it go.
As I started to take that pressure off of myself and just sort of feel it a little better, it sort of opened up a little easier.
Yep.
And I can't wait to dig in. Tom, it was great to have you here, my friend. From all of us here, thank you for joining us. We had wonderful champagnes. You've got a stopper there. Don't feel obligated to drink everything here tonight. Save one for tomorrow. Enjoy all the oysters that you have here. Thank you for joining us. My name is Nelson the Kip, the Wine and Spirits Director, and this is a dear friend of mine, Tom Stocks from Taylor Shellfish.
Thank you.
Cheers.
All right.
Nice work,
my man.